Waters and Stanton video channel is devoted to ham radio topics, including equipment and techniques. It is hosted by Peter Waters, G30JV.
Today we're going to talk about the HF bands and the budget needed to get onto the HF bands. Like any hobby, ham radio comes with cost. Now, I don't play golf, but I guess that you can buy some second-hand clubs fairly cheaply. And I think if you're into photography, if you've got a smartphone, you can start there. So where do we start in ham radio? How much does it actually cost for the newcomer to put an HF station on the air? And the reason I sort of bring this subject up is because it's a very important point, because you're not going to go into a hobby unless you can afford it. And if the hobby is too expensive, then it limits the newcomers to the hobby to those that can afford it. So exactly how much will it cost to get on the HF bands? Well, if you're going to buy new equipment, then there is a premium. The cheapest HF transceiver from the mainline manufacturers is the FT891, which is around about £700. So it's not cheap. For some people, that's a significant outlay. And if you want to go a bit up market, then there's the ICOM IC7300. Now, the advantage of the IC7300 is it has a built-in antenna tuner, and I would suggest that if you're a newcomer, you probably will need an antenna tuner or an antenna matching unit. The FT891, the ASTOR FT891, doesn't come with a matching unit, so you'd have to budget for an additional matching unit. So it's very difficult to get much below £1,000 because there are other bits and pieces you need. But I think that a lot of newcomers will actually consider buying second hand. And if you consider buying second hand, then you can bring the budget down significantly. So let's take a look at what you might consider. Now, I've already said that I think you probably would need to invest in an antenna matching unit, antenna tuner, ATU as we call it. Most of the modern rigs have that item built in, but if you're going to buy a second hand, you may well be considering a unit that hasn't got a tuner built in. Well, don't worry about that, because you can have an external tuner. In discussing this and covering the various choices, I'm going to put my neck out and suggest that you consider a 100-watt transceiver. Now, the reason I say that is because even though your license may limit you in power, you may well upgrade your license and thereby be able to run 100 watts. And also, if you decide you don't like the hobby for any reason, then it's usually easier to sell a 100-watt radio than it is to sell a lower powered radio. Now, I've also limited it to the main manufacturers, because although there is some cheaper Chinese and Taiwanese radios about, very few of them cover 100 watts. They're lower powered, and if you're a newcomer, you want the reassurance that if anything goes wrong, it's going to be easy to get it repaired. So I've deliberately missed those out, not for any other reason than that. If you want to go down that route, you can, but I think that if you're a newcomer, if you've got a problem with the transceiver, you need to know that you can at least get it repaired. I've also ruled out valve equipment. There's a lot of valve equipment still available, and it is quite cheap, but it is long past its sell-by date, really, and if anything goes wrong, you probably will find it difficult to get it repaired unless you have the capability yourself, or you find somebody in the local club. And when we're talking about clubs, that is one way that you may be able to save some money. If you belong to a local radio club, you may find that somebody there is very generous and will loan you a transceiver. That was one of the first commercial transceivers I had, was a loan from a member of the local club, and it certainly helped me along. Also, of course, you may find that the local club members have got something to sell on, and they'll probably do it at a reasonable price, and you have the satisfaction, at least I hope you have the satisfaction, of knowing that if it does go wrong, they will help you out. So belonging to a club and sourcing your equipment that way is not a bad idea. But of course, you may not belong to a club. So you've got the usual route of eBay, the small ads and so forth, and the main dealers that have a range of second-hand equipment. There's two radios that I'm going to pick out for no other reason that I know them, and that is the FT840, Yaesu FT840, which is a budget price transceiver, no longer made, but there was a lot of them manufactured, and therefore there's a lot of them out there to buy second-hand. And the IC706, again, which had a tremendous following, and there's a lot of those about. The IC706 doesn't have an antenna tuner. The FT840 will normally have an antenna tuner inside. For an FT840, you could probably pick one up if you hunt around for around about £500, and that includes the antenna tuning unit. For the IC706, you may be looking at around about £400. That doesn't have the antenna tuner, but you can purchase an antenna tuner suitable for it. The LDG model comes to mind, which is £169. So IC706 with tuner is going to be around about £550, £560, and the FT840 around about £500. But we haven't finished yet. All ham radio, or almost all ham radio modern transceivers, are designed for 12 volts and you need a power supply. Well, I'm going to put up on the screen here a power supply which we sell, which won't break the bank, and bear in mind that that power supply will last you an awful long time. Even if you change your equipment, that power supply will still be able to power your new equipment. There was a video I watched recently where they were talking about new equipment and investment in what else you need to buy, and they suggested that you buy the most expensive coax you can afford. Well, I would suggest that probably is not a sensible suggestion. Coax cable can indeed be rather expensive, and there's some very good coax cable. But if you're going to operate on the HF bands, you actually don't need an expensive type of coax cable, particularly if you're going to limit your power to 100 watts. Shock horror, I'm going to suggest that you consider RG58. Now, I've seen all sorts of people say, oh, it's rubbish, etc., etc. Well, there is some pretty poor stuff about. We sell some excellent RG58 cable. It's very good. It's got a very close, dense weave to it, and it'll handle 100 watts. And unless you're going to run more than 20 or 30 metres down the garden, it's going to be quite okay. There will be a small amount of loss on, say, 15 and 10 metres, but very small indeed. The great thing to remember, and the reason for not spending a lot of money on coax cable, is that if you buy a length of expensive coax cable, I guarantee that within a year you'll change things and you'll suddenly find that that length of cable is not the right length. So my suggestion would be to budget and buy some RG58 cable if you want to spend a bit more money and you think you'd like something a bit heavier, and you're worried about the loss on 10 and 15 metres, which is small anyway. Go for something like the RG213 cable, which we also sell, and it's good quality stuff. Now when it comes to antennas, well, that's a very difficult one, simply because there's so much to choose from. If you're on a budget, then maybe something like a G5RV dipole will do the trick, because you're going to have a built-in antenna tuner in the radio or an external one, and you do need an antenna tuner for the G5RV. If you've got a small garden, half-size G5RV is around about 51, 52 feet. Sorry, it's not in metres, but they are the figures I know from the top of my head. The half-size G5RV dipole will cover 40 through to 10 metres, and it's around about 50 foot long. If you want the full-size one, it's twice as long, and that adds the 80 metre band to it. You should be able to get your G5RV for something like 30 to 50 pounds. So that is something else to add on to the total cost, but it's not overly expensive. You can opt for other items. End-fed half-wave antennas are very good. Vibraplex do a range. We do the Vibraplex range, but you are talking about another £150. So maybe the G5RV is not a bad starter. It'll get you on the air. I have to apologise actually. This is not very professional, but the Waters and Stanton banner behind me did go off during this video. Apologies for that. Such a basic thing to make a mistake on. But there we are. It's amateur radio. Perhaps it's an amateur video as well. What else do you need? Well, although a lot of radios now have got built-in SWR meters, I think it's quite useful to have an external one because it gives you much better indication. It's a larger meter to read, and it's sort of thing that you're ultimately going to have anyway. So I put one up on the screen here, which is a budget class SWR meter. It'll do the job, and it'll tell you what's happening to your transceiver, what the power is, and whether you've got any problems with the VSWR. So I'll put that on the list as well. And finally, how are you going to support this antenna? Well, if you live in a house, you might be able to use the house as one end of the support, and down the garden you might have a tree or you might not. You need some method of support. Now, in the early stages, when you're getting started, it doesn't actually have to be that high. The target really here is to try and get the starting budget as low as possible, which is why I'm sort of suggesting this and that. If you spend more money, of course, then the choice is wider and it's easier to assemble a station. And that really is all you actually need. So I'm going to put up on the screen here the rough calculation of the sort of things we're talking about and what the total cost is. Now, I have run through this list pretty quickly, and the whole idea of this short video was just to give you some idea of what the cost may be. I know some of you experienced amateurs out there will say, oh, well, what about this and what about that, and etc., etc. The fact is, there's a wide choice of options. Second-hand clearly is the way to go if you're on a tight budget. If your budget permits, then obviously if you buy a new transceiver, you've got the advantage of a 2 or 3 year warranty, but it does put the price up. So I hope that that list that I've given you is a guide, and that's really all it is intended to be, a guide as to what it might cost you to get on the HF bands. It's great fun. The good news about the HF bands is that we are climbing up what is known as the Sunspot cycle. It's a cycle that is 11 years long, and we've just passed the minimum point, the worst point if you like, of the Sunspot cycle. Things will now get better. In the next 2, 3, 4 years, we will climb up to the cycle until in 4 years' time, 3.5, 4 years' time, we shall hit the top of the cycle. And that means conditions will be really good and you'll be able to work some really good DX. So things from now on will get better. So it's not a bad time to get on the HF bands. Hope that's been useful to you. Thanks for watching this video. Take care. Don't forget, here at Waters and Stanton in Portsmouth, we've got a wide range of equipment, and we'll be happy to advise you if you're still not sure what you need, even if it's just some cable or a bit of support cord, SWR meter, or, dare I say, a brand new radio. Anyway, you take care, enjoy your ham radio, speak soon.